You've had the experience both inside the regulatory world and outside as an advocate, so I think you bring a special perspective to how to make regulation, what it takes to get it done, and why you need it, what goes on behind the scenes to protect our safety. I've raised concerns in this committee a number of times about what I think is the president's kind of misguided executive order, where he says for every regulation you put in place, you have to eliminate two, this arbitrary rule. As you've heard from some of my colleagues, regulation has become kind of a punching bag or a dirty word, where regulation is bad. We need to get rid of regulation. They tend to forget that regulation is put in place for the safety of people who are driving or who are riding on our highways and buses and cars, going to school, our children. Also, they tend to forget that the regulations that y'all put in place are the result of legislation that we pass. I've got a list of the regulations that were required by the FAST Act, just the FAST Act, and I would remind this committee that some of the people who are criticizing regulations voted for that FAST Act that required y'all to put in place these regulations. So I would just ask you kind of what your perspective is on making regulations in this new environment where you have to strike two that you thought were good for safety now in order to do something else as technology changes, communication changes, the world changes. Would you address that for us?
Thank you, Congresswoman Titus, for that very complex question. Clearly, we are not a regulatory agency, so we're a little bit different from my colleagues here on the panel. But the recommendations we make do affect regulation. And we are very careful about that. We are not for regulation that is unneeded. Any recommendations we make that affect regulations are based on an investigation of a terrible tragedy and ways that we can prevent it from happening again. That said, we also give recommendations that allow other options other than regulations. So many of our recommendations regarding impaired driving, distracted driving, are targeted more towards states, for example. Sometimes it's targeted towards companies. Sometimes it's targeted towards associations. So I think it's a balance between ensuring that those regulations that are that are most safety critical do go forward, and at the same time are not, any of those things are not delayed. For example, I'll give you an example, the safety fitness determination. We are very concerned that that delay will affect safety because that rulemaking was withdrawn. So that said, I think that I hope that all of us, no matter where we come from, are prioritizing safety in our decision-making regarding regulations as well as other forms of advancing safety.
Thank you. Other members of the panel will address this from the standpoint of your agencies of striking two to do one new one.
I think maybe I can just affirm from the Federal Highway Administration, I agree that safety is the #1 priority of the department, and that does take a priority in this 1-for-2 rule.
We at the FMCSA are reviewing all of our regulations, but as we continue to focus on safety, we take that into consideration. And so we want to make sure that the rules that are in place remain current and relevant, but continue to focus our attention on safety.
I would just echo the comments of my colleagues.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Mr. Graves from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.